Hello and welcome to Synchronicity Talk Radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard, and you might be listening to this on CITR 101.9 FM in Vancouver, where we broadcast from unceded Musqueam territory on the University of British Columbia campus, or you might be listening online at CITR.ca, CosmicDimensions.com, EmpowerRadio.com, on the Co-Creator Network, or you might be watching this on YouTube, and wherever on the planet you are from. Thank you so much for joining us and spending this hour with us. Today's guest is Donald Altman, and he is a psychotherapist, a former Buddhist monk, and the award-winning author of several books, including 1 Minute Mindfulness, The Mindfulness Toolbox, and The Mindfulness Code. He conducts mindful living and mindful eating workshops and retreats, and he trains mental health therapists and business people to use mindfulness as a tool for optimizing health and fulfillment. And we are going to be talking today about his latest book, Clearing Emotional Clutter, Mindfulness Practices for Letting Go of What's Blocking Your Fulfillment and Transformation. Welcome to the show, Donald.
Oh, hi, Marie. It's great to be with you today. And it's wonderful to see how technology is reaching out to so many people, isn't it?
It's amazing. And we
Yeah.
actually, this has been a lot in the news about the availability of social media and how everyone now has a voice.
Very true. That's very true.
And there's pros and cons to that.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, there's how do we get a balance there? And it's like anything, right? Moderation is helpful.
So, Donald, with regards to mindfulness and clearing emotional clutter, since we're on the topic of social media, how do you and your clients deal with this barrage of information and opinions that's so prevalent today?
Well, that's a great question, and it depends on how it's affecting somebody and how you're managing it. And that can be a form of clutter, actually, emotional clutter. And maybe what I'd like to do is just share the idea that emotional clutter is invisible, and that's why we often don't understand how it's affecting us. Whereas physical clutter, you can see it, and you can see how it's disruptive to your personal environment. But emotional clutter fills up our minds, and sometimes technology can do that. If you're observing technology all the time, and I've heard that the average 8 to 18-year-old and this is from a Kaiser Family Foundation study, is looking at screens about 7.5 hours a day.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a long time. And the average adult in the U.S. is actually around 5.5 hours. And what the implications of that have a lot to do with how we connect with others. And there's an area, and I'd like to talk about brain science in the Clearing Emotional Clutter book. There's an area of the brain I call the mindfulness module. It's right behind the eyebrow ridge, behind your eyebrows, the underside part of the brain. And that is very much wired up through face-to-face connection with others. And technology is great and it's a lot of fun. It's very helpful, but we also need to have that face-to-face connection. I'm sure you've seen, like I have, in restaurants where entire families, everybody's sitting at a table, but they're all looking at a screen, right? So it's important to know how to, when is that maybe creating kind of clutter that's not allowing us to connect and build relationships. I think is so important for our, not just social health and well-being, but our happiness.
Well, Donald, I'm curious also because now this latest thing, epigenetics. There's neurobiology, there's epigenetics, where we're actually changing our DNA on the fly, and then our offspring end up having those same genes. And I'm wondering, now that we're spending less and less face time and more screen time, if today's kids are going to be having children that, I mean, I'm actually just off the top of my head wondering if maybe this autistic spectrum that's coming forth now is a result of all of this screen time on our genes.
I mean, I actually, my personal feeling is that it is related to that, and that our genes turn on and off throughout the day, moment by moment, by by how we're experiencing things, right, in our environment and even in our own thoughts. So here, this is very dynamic relationship of our genes turning on and off and expressing. And we're learning now that that's even inheritable. So how we change our genes, and that's kind of the software. Epigenetics means above the genetics or above the gene. That's the software that's running our genetic programming. And we're finding that that software is even inheritable now. So the changes that we're making, our children may get those. So if we're becoming a little bit more on the autistic spectrum just because we're watching so much technology and not interacting face to face, that may be inheritable. There was a great study, and I think this is one of the ones I include in my book because I think it's important for us to understand some of the new research that's coming out. And this study looked at preteens, and it tested them for their ability to notice, recognize facial expressions and social cues and emotions, and they tested very low. So they took them to an outdoor camp, and they took away their screens, their mobile devices. They had to interact with their peers at this outdoor camp for a period of 5 days, and then they were retested, and their ability just shot right up again. Their ability to notice, again, those emotions and facial cues, body gestures, and so forth. And so they regained that ability. So here's a great example of, even if you had been wired that way, that making these changes could reverse that wiring, because we're innately built in for social connection. That part of the brain, that mindfulness module, wires up for empathy and social connection really from the ages of about 10 to 24 months when the initial wiring takes place, and it continues to wire through our lifetime. But it is possible, I believe, that that an overuse of technology, especially at a young age when the brain is still developing, might be affecting that in an unintended adverse way. Mm-hmm. So it's a great question that you asked there. So I think we need to be more aware, and this is one way of really dealing with that emotional clutter, and you can think of that emotional clutter too as anything that is, kind of the programming that we don't want, the programming that is not allowing us to live the life we want or participate fully in this moment. And so anything that allows us to be more present, I think, can undo some of the old wiring in the brain.
Awesome. That's really exciting,
Yeah,
Donald.
it's exciting.
That's the thing for me. Emotional clutter, to me, I notice that especially with all the technology, and our email inbox is always in a new, just never ending stream of things mm-hmm. that we have to do. I find that I feel overwhelmed a lot of the time. And I'm wondering if that's what I think of when I hear the word emotional clutter.
And that is certainly one kind of clutter. That's the present moment clutter that you're identifying there, Marie, of just feeling that there's just you're kind of immersed in chaos and there's too much to do and you can never catch up, and it's perpetual. And that kind of clutter needs to be cleaned out daily, almost like flossing your teeth. Right? That tartar builds up daily, and the emails that keep arriving in your inbox have the same kind of effect. So I think it's important for us to learn how to have some healthy boundaries with technology, and to give ourselves a break from it every now and then. I'm not suggesting we just don't use it. It's too useful and there's a lot of benefit, but we need to know, and everybody's a little bit different about when is it getting me where I'm not having the same kind of ability to really focus for longer periods of time. When is that happening for me? So I think we need a technology diet, and a technology diet could be one time every evening. Maybe you spend an hour without technology, so it's conscious. It's a conscious choice. Or maybe you do it one day a week, where you and your family just decide, well, we're going to go on a technology diet for a day here, really be present with one another and play games or take a walk, go in nature. And I worked in an eating disorder clinic for about 4 years. It's an intensive outpatient clinic. And it was a younger population, and many of them would sleep with their cell phones under their pillows. Mm-hmm. And so, if they got a text at 2 or 3 in the morning, they felt they had to answer that text immediately. But these were people, with eating disorders who already have a kind of a compromised health situation, and here they were not allowing themselves to get the kind of rest that was necessary. So I think even when you're talking about something as important as sleep, sleep is really critical to clearing emotional clutter. It's important for learning. Actually, when we sleep, it's fascinating. There's something called the glymphatic system that we just learned about a year ago, and that means that when you sleep, your brain cells actually shrink, and cerebral spinal fluid is pumped up into the brain, and it cleanses out waste products in the brain. And it only happens when we sleep. So I think we have to honor our body's need for that. I mean, our bodies. We grew up on a 24-hour Earth cycle for sleep, and it's important for self-care to do that.
That's interesting. I haven't been sleeping that well lately, and I notice the impact it's had on my immune system. I can feel the
Yeah,
impact of it.
yeah. It only takes about 2 to 3 days with not enough sleep to put you into a chronic stress state, and that is where when you're talking about the immune system, where uh, you're getting an overabundance of cortisol going throughout the body, and if that happens for 2 or 3 days, that chronic stress state, cortisol actually dampens your immune system, puts the brake on your T cell count. It lowers it actually kills NK cells. Those are called natural killer cells. They fight viruses and even some kinds of tumors. So we know there's a direct connection between sleep and the immune system. I'm not trying to get you stressed out here, by the but I really am always trying to get people to take their sleep more seriously.
Thanks, Donald. Yeah. No, now I'm all worried. No, I'll be fine. I slept last night, but it was 2 or 3 nights where I was having trouble sleeping, and then I woke
Yeah.
up with that little tickle in the throat, and I'm
Mm,
like, oh, that's yep, should have
yeah.
been sleeping better. So you mentioned your eating disorder clients at the eating
Mm,
disorder clinic, and that triggered a memory of something that you mentioned in your book, Clearing Emotional Clutter. We're speaking with Donald Altman right now. He's the author of Clearing Emotional Clutter, Mindfulness Practices for Letting Go of What's Blocking Your Fulfillment and Transformation. And one of the things that I found not that surprising because I kind of identified with this concept. One of your clients said to you, well, without my eating disorder, who would I be?
right. Yeah. And I think that's true even of our own clutter. Well, what if I didn't have these problems? I mean, who would I be without this anxiety, without this depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's easy to we start identifying with the thoughts we have, uh, and the truth is that our thoughts really don't always tell us a lot about ourselves. For example, Marie, scientists say we can have between 25 to 125 thoughts per second. So even if you take the low range, let's say 25 thoughts per second, I've done the math, it comes out to about 75,000 thoughts in the course of a day. And how many of those thoughts, I want your listeners to think about it, really tell you something very profound about yourself? How many of those thoughts are accurate, even? But often we identify with those thoughts, we take them as factual, we believe them, and they can pull us in an unhealthy direction, right? Or we might identify with them. And so it's important. One of the skills I talk about in clearing emotional clutter is to help us create some constructive distancing from those thoughts, make our mind our friend. Isn't that a nice concept? Make our mind our friend, stop fighting it. If we're having conflictual thoughts, we're having self-blaming thoughts, we're having self-shaming thoughts, that we need to start to observe those in a more neutral, objective, maybe even a curious way, instead of just grabbing on and taking them as fact. And that's actually one of the key concepts in the book, is starting to learn how to notice our thoughts through a process that I actually call inner Facebooking.
Oh, yes, let's talk about that. What is inner
Okay.
Facebooking?
Yeah, inner Facebook. So think about Facebook for a moment, and how you're putting up posts about your life, or maybe you're looking at other posts other people have put up, and how those affect you. You get an emotional feeling from looking at these. Now, the average Facebook user, new study just came out from Facebook themselves, and they said their average user spends about 50 minutes a day on Facebook. That's about 1/16 of their waking time. So that's a lot of time, but it's nothing compared to the inner Facebooking posts, the second Facebook, as I call it, the more pervasive Facebook of the mind, inner Facebook of those 75,000 thoughts per day that you're putting up, mental posts about yourself. Now, if those posts are telling you that you're not adequate, you're not good enough, you don't compare well to somebody else, you're not going to succeed, or that you're severely limited in one way or another, how is that going to make you feel? I mean, how is that going to affect your life? It's a form of personal verbal abuse if you think about it. And so, just as those thoughts can negatively impact us, we need to become more aware of them and start to look at them, and not create a whole nother set of blaming thoughts, like, oh my God, look how many bad thoughts I have, I must be screwed up, right? Not to do that, but to just look at it in a more compassionate way, in a more neutral way, in a curious way, and say, wow, isn't that interesting, look at all these thoughts. And I had a client. I want to tell you a story because it illustrates what I'm saying here and how we can notice that inner Facebooking, and it can be helpful to do that. Is a man who came to see me. He had lost his job, and I remember he was severely depressed. And I said, "So tell me what's going on with you." And he said, I lost my job. I had a business actually. I lost my business. He said, I can't get another job because I'm not very good at using the computer. He said, I don't know how to interview well. And by the way, the economy really stinks. And he just had all these reasons why he couldn't move forward. And so I listened to him and I said, I'm really impressed with this list of reasons that you can't move forward. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to put together a top 10 list of those reasons for me. And the reason I wanted him to do that was I wanted him to get out of his head and to have them in front of him on a sheet of paper so he could actually observe them. And so he thought that was a good idea. That's when Letterman had his top 10 list. He was excited about it. So he went off, he made his top 10 list, and he came back and I said, so how did that go with the top 10 list? And he said, well, he said, I pulled out this long yellow sheet of paper and he said, well, it was good. He said, but something happened when I looked at my list. And I said, really? What was that? He said, well, I couldn't believe it. He says, I looked at my list and all of a sudden I realized, he said, this is how my mother thinks. Isn't that interesting that he realized it, what the thoughts that he thought were all his, where he'd really adopted a learning style. He'd adopted a way of perceiving his reality, of interpreting it, of thinking about how he couldn't succeed. And those really weren't his own thoughts. It was a
Wow.
family pattern of thoughts. And then he said, I don't want to think like that anymore. And boy, was that guy motivated to really kind of reprogram his thinking and his brain. So noticing those inner thoughts can be really an amazing journey into our past and give us some uh, a kind of a fresh perspective on things and let us start over again, start new. And so that's what I think the benefit of noticing the inner Facebooking is. And then, once you start to notice those thoughts, it becomes easier. The thoughts are going by very, very fast. And I call them mind whispers. I mean, that's how quick they are. When I started to do this work, these mind whispers come by so quickly. I was like, wait, what was that thought? And if you're not careful, the interesting thing is those thoughts can act like little commands, and they put you on autopilot and they tell you what to do. Now, I mean, is that how you want to live your life? That's why this Clearing Emotional Clutter book, I think, is a very transformational book, and that can help us clear those out, and we can become, more in control, the master of how we want to set our intentions, how we want to live with purpose, how we want to go throughout our day. And so I think that it's important for us to also notice the positive things. And that's why I talk about strengths in this book too. So once you notice your inner Facebooking and, if it's negative, it's not helping you, then you need to find your strengths. You need to find something to counterbalance those negative thoughts. And I'm not talking about being phony and saying, oh, I'm so great, I'm so good. It's not about that. It's about really more accurately assessing your strengths. And psychologists have identified over 108 different strengths. I mean, but often we don't even notice them. Sometimes we might devalue them, or we just ignore them and take them for granted. Oh, that's just my routine. So, for example, if you brush your teeth this morning, that's a strength of self-care, right? You got a better sleep last night, you were saying. So that again is a strength of that's self-care, nourishing yourself, nurturing yourself. If you walked your dog or fed your cat this morning, that's a strength of caring for another. It shows compassion. If you smile at somebody, or maybe hold the door open for somebody, do one little nice thing, that's a strength of hospitality. If you can laugh at yourself, that's a strength of humor, or laugh at your situation. If you walk out of the mall and you come in this big parking lot of all these cars out there, when you can find your car, that's the strength of memory. And sometimes we just are just oblivious to all of these strengths that we already have. So I like to have people take a strengths challenge, and so I could even put that out to your audience today, to take a strengths challenge, to do whatever you're doing today. I want you to just consciously be aware of it and look at what are the strengths behind that. What enabled me to be effective in that way today? What and try to expand your strengths vocabulary. You can actually, I talk about a lot of strengths in the Clearing Emotional Clutter book, but if you go to it's an organization that actually looks at strengths called viacharacter.org. It's VIA character.org. They have a strengths inventory test you can take, and it will show you your 24 top strengths.
Cool.
It takes only 15 minutes to do that. So I'm a big believer that could be a helpful thing. And then what you do, so you do this strengths challenge, and then once you've identified some of your strengths, put one strength into action one time a day for a week. And then, maybe at the end of the day, write down, keep track of how that made you feel, what that was, how maybe it affected others. And then at the end of a week, go look at that. And maybe you want to share that with someone else. And then the next week, find a different strength and practice that one time a day for a week. It can be very powerful in actually helping you have a sense of self-efficacy, confidence, and fulfillment in just how you're participating in your day. I mean, it's a little practice, but it's a very powerful practice.
I love that. And Donald, I can see how when you talked about the strengths inventory, again, the website is viacharacter.org, correct?
That's right.
Yes.
That's correct.
And speaking of websites, if you want to check out Donald's website, it's mindfulpractices.com. And we are speaking with Donald Altman, the author of Clearing Emotional Clutter, Mindfulness Practices for Letting Go of What's Blocking Your Fulfillment and Transformation. And I can imagine there are a lot of people that are in, as one example, in jobs that they don't like. They don't find it fulfilling. So when you were talking about the strengths inventory, it made me think of, if we look at the strengths that we use in the job that we have, even though it might not be the job that we want to stay in forever, if we can look at strengthening and appreciating the strengths that we are using, that's going to give us more energy and momentum to do better things.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great example, actually, Marie, is that you could look at the areas in your life where maybe things aren't, as optimal as you'd like them to be, but then look at the strengths you're using in that situation and allow it to be an area where you can start to grow. And often it's the areas in our lives where we think things aren't perfect that provides the fertile ground for growth. And that could be a nice way to think about. I also think that having gratitude, maybe you've heard the saying, pray for the things you already have in your life. Mm-hmm. That way you'll never be disappointed. And, if you could do that, that's just a wonderful way of looking at, what I call silver lining gratitude, or paradoxical gratitude, the gratitude for things, that you maybe are resisting or fighting against. There's a lot of energy that we put into resisting things that are in our life. And it creates more pain for us, more suffering. And so having a greater sense of acceptance for even those difficult things, or even appreciating the silver lining for those things, or the possibility of growing as a result of those things, can bring a whole new dimension into your life, and that can clear away the negative clutter.
Donald, that sparked another issue for me.
Yeah.
I know that in this new age movement and the self-help and the law of attraction and all of that, we're all always trying to better ourselves. And I know we've already talked about this a little bit, how we'll beat ourselves up for those negative thoughts, or we'll say, oh, well, I have this problem and I don't have a right to feel how I feel about it because children are starving in Africa or whatever. So, what's the difference between finding the silver lining in our struggles and negating how we feel about our struggles?
Mm. Well, you know what? The one thing about mindfulness is it is not about hiding or escaping or pretending things are better than they are. It's about directly confronting and seeing things as they are, and even being able to just be with that, being able to sit with that, and being able to accept that, and then to see, well, where do I want to move forward from here if I can, or even just changing my attitude might help me experience this differently. So it's not that, even and looking at your weaknesses is actually another strength, isn't it? It's the ability uh, to appraise and examine and reflect inwardly. So that's actually a strength. Um, and I think we can grow from that too. I'm not saying that any negative thought is necessarily a bad thing. Uh, we can learn from even those thoughts, but what I'm saying is if we're stuck if we're dwelling on those negative thoughts or they're not accurate, then we're really doing ourselves a disservice and we might just be stuck in an old pattern or an old program that's running in our head. Um, so I think it's important to uh, look at things with a fresh perspective, to get more curious about everything about our life, a curious perspective. Just an example, one time, as a writer, I've had a lot of people sometimes ask me, I have a great idea for a book. Would you work on this with me? And there was a period of time where I just automatically said, when I would hear somebody start to say that, I would automatically say no. I was just too busy. And finally, there was a guy I worked with, and he was a psychotherapist, and he worked in addictions. A really nice guy and smart guy. He used mindfulness in his work with addicts. And one day he said to me, he said, "Hey, I had this idea for a mindfulness book working with addicts," and I just heard that instant no come up in my head, and uh, and right before I was going to respond to him and just say, "No, Robert, I can't. I can't do that. I'm, too busy." I I caught that, and I said, "Wait, that's just. I'm not really listening to him. He probably has a really good idea. I'm going to open myself up to it." And so I vetoed the no. And we actually have veto power. There's been some interesting studies that have been shown that actually we can, if we're about to do something or act upon something, we can, or even an impulse or maybe an addiction, or a craving, we can stop it. And so, but in that moment, I stopped that automatic reaction, and I decided that wasn't fair to me, and it wasn't fair to him. And so I allowed myself to listen to it, and it, and so it's good to start to notice when we're uh, going into that autopilot mode and to allow ourselves to be more open in this moment, especially with others.
Hmm. Thank you, Donald. We are speaking right now with Donald Altman. He's the author of Clearing Emotional Clutter, Mindfulness Practices for Letting Go of What's Blocking Your Fulfillment and Transformation. And Donald is a psychotherapist, a former Buddhist monk. He teaches a lot, obviously, about mindfulness and has a lot of experience in this field. And I just wanted to bring it back to the book if people are thinking about reading the book. You built your book around the 6 clutter clearing mindfulness skills.
Right.
And I'm wondering if maybe we can go through that acronym and what it
Sure.
means.
Yeah. And it's called Pair Up, PAIRUP. And it's really about these are 6 mindfulness skills that help you pair up or become a better fit with whatever's happening in your life. And I've never heard it described this way. I've been teaching mindfulness for many years, traveling around the country and internationally, and so it's deep in my understanding. So the P stands for present moment participation. Uh, maybe, if you've ever been to a carnival and you got one of those little tickets and on the back it says you must be present to win. So that's about, you must be present, right? You must, that present moment participation to really enjoy this moment fully, completely. Attuned to acceptance is for the A, and that means attuning ourselves with others, being open, connected to others. And also acceptance means accepting this moment for what it is, not trying to, sometimes we try to impose shoulds. Oh, this person should be like that, or this experience should be like that, like this. But letting go of the shoulds and really just accepting things for as they are right now, right? And that's an attitude that we can take no matter what is happening to us. Intentionality, the I is intentionality, which means choiceful awareness. Even the little things right now, I can make a decision, I can make a choice about how I want to respond, and so that I don't create additional clutter, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Reflection, the R stands for looking within, noticing what really matters to me most. That's about looking at your values, looking at your purpose in life, and deciding how you could start to align your actions with what really matters to you. So if you're in a relationship, think about what's my mission statement for this relationship? What's my mission statement for being a parent? What's my mission statement for this career that I have? But that's reflection. And that means pausing sometimes. Sometimes reflection just means pausing for this moment, for whatever's happening right now. Then the U is understanding of suffering. This is really important. And it goes to the idea that everybody has suffered. There isn't anybody in a human body or a human mind who hasn't experienced loss, isn't going to experience aging, right? And isn't going to experience sadness at some point or another. So this is something we share. It's part of the human experience, part of the richness of our experience. And it can help us enter a place of compassion for those who maybe are the difficult persons in our life, who are maybe their suffering is spilling over onto us. But if we can understand and experience and understand that they are suffering, that can help us maybe deal with it more. Not to accept abuse. That's not what I'm talking about. Not to excuse abuse, but to have a greater understanding. And then even self-compassion, understanding of our own suffering. What are we suffering from right now? How can we pull out the roots of that, like you pull out a weed out of the ground? And so this is digging deeper. This is a way of, in the moment, and I've done this where I've noticed myself suffering, my mind gets caught in some kind of a loop, and I'm like, whoa, where did this knot first get tied? And I can start to untie it, and it's beautiful. It's liberating in that moment to release that knot of suffering. Then P is purposeful partnership, and a lot of times mindfulness is just experienced as, or just taught as, well, it's about what's happening in my mind, it's what's happening in the body, and certainly it is those things, but it's also about how we can sustainably support one another. And it's how we co-create this moment. It's how we can support one another, just as we're doing this show together today. And I hope this is supporting you, and your work is helping support my passion for mindfulness. So we have to see how we can help one another achieve beneficial goals and move forward together. So those are the 7 tools or the 6 tools rather, that are kind of the core of this book.
Thank you so much, Donald. You mentioned when it comes to understanding of suffering, and I imagine this would also be a transferable skill throughout all of your mindfulness skills. You mention the emotional jujitsu in your book. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I'm trying to remember exactly where I said that.
I think, well, maybe that was my interpretation of what you wrote, but I seem to recall. You're talking about
say it somewhere, yeah.
empathy with people who are, you mentioned the problematic people in our lives. Sometimes when we can just take a step back and consider their point of suffering and empathize, it actually ends up, instead of fighting against, we end up using that energy more
that's
efficiently.
the emotional jujitsu.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we don't have to resist or push against them, but we actually are, we enter their world and we get curious about it. They don't have anything to fight against. They don't have anybody to push against. And so it changes the dynamic in a very wonderful and helpful way. So I encourage people to try that, even with that difficult person in your life, is to get curious about them and to listen for what's beneath the content of the word. So, I worked with a guy whose mother was he felt his mother was very critical of him. And that no matter what he did with his kids, she would be critical. Either if he was helping his kids, then he was too much like a helicopter parent. If he was giving them some freedom, then he was neglectful. And so I asked him to really just kind of listen beneath the surface for what's happening, what's the subtext, what's happening there for your parent, for your mom as you're listening. And again, this could be for anybody who has a difficult person in your life. And if you stop listening to the words and listen below the surface, if you notice the body language, notice the facial expressions, and he did that, and he came back to me and he said, my mother is lonely. I said, I never realized it before, but she's trying to connect with me, and he said, she doesn't really know how. So it's really fascinating how, when we let go of our own defenses and we can clear out relational clutter in that way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really found that interesting, that concept of the jujitsu, because I think I don't know a lot about martial arts, but that's the one where you really use the other person's body weight to do most of the
Right.
work instead of pushing against and using your own strength.
Yeah, and then when when you're getting curious about somebody, also what's happening is you're engaging them, and that's your mental jujitsu, so that they get pulled in a different way, and you're breaking the old pattern suddenly. So you're not coming into that old push and pull pattern that you may have had with that person. You're suddenly entering creating something new. It's a new space, and you're both kind of entering it together. And then the other person doesn't feel that maybe that you're being defensive either, or that you're criticizing them. Of course, it's always a two-way street, no matter how you try to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Donald, I'm curious if you have a favorite technique or a beginner technique that you want listeners to consider today.
Hmm. Yeah, and what I would this, I have lifestyle tools throughout the book, and they're some of them are they seem simple, but they're very, very powerful, and they're all very basic, and we need all of them. So I'd like to share the one that I call Fidelity to the Moment.
Mm.
That's actually the name of the chapter, and so that's kind of like faithfulness to what's happening right now. So uh, letting go of your expectations or preconceived ideas of how this moment's supposed to be. So here are a few examples. You can have fidelity with the breath. So fidelity with this next breath, uh, and that, as you're breathing, I want you to think, is this yesterday? Is this tomorrow? This breath is very much this moment. And it's the essence of non-attachment. You can't hold on to a breath very long, can you?
Mm-hmm.
You could have fidelity with another. So it's like softening and receiving another person and being mutual with them, being having reciprocity, being interested, being curious. So open all of yourself to this person and listen beyond the words. You can have fidelity with yourself. So that means even letting go of who you think you are. We spend a lot of time pretending that we're somebody. I'm a this, I'm a that. What happened if you pretend you're nobody for a moment? Or let in a little bit of light and spaciousness into the mind, spacious awareness. There's fidelity with the body. There's fidelity with what you're experiencing in the body right now. You could have fidelity with walking. And you could simplify. That's another form of fidelity, just simplifying your day a little bit here and there. So those are some ideas. That's one practice that I love personally.
Thank you so much. And Donald, again, we're speaking with Donald Altman. He is the author of Clearing Emotional Clutter, Mindfulness Practices for Letting Go of What's Blocking Your Fulfillment and Transformation. And I know you have a busy day full of interviews. We have just a few minutes left in the show, and I certainly have a ton more questions, but I'm wondering where you'd like to take the rest of this interview.
Hmm. Um, well, Yeah, that's a great question. I could talk a little about, we've talked about self-acceptance actually, and I could actually, depending on how much time, lead your audience in a short self-acceptance meditation, which I very much enjoy, and it's actually in the book. Would that be possible?
Sure, we have, well, it's all about your time as well. We have about 15 minutes until the end of our hour.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, I can do this in about, uh, you know, 7, 8 minutes or so.
All right.
And great, great. So this is about self-acceptance, and and I call it my meditation for resting in self-acceptance. So right now, I want you to, and there's two parts to this practice. So the first part is to think about something that maybe that you're rejecting in your life, something that you're having a difficulty with. It could be an external grievance that you have, a complaint about somebody, or maybe it's something that is hurting you. So I want you to identify that one thing you find difficult to accept. It might be a health condition, it could be anything, and I want you to be specific about it. You could write it down if you want, and if you would, or you could just think of it. But I'm going to give you a few examples. So, for example, maybe I'm getting older, I don't feel attractive anymore. You might have the thought, well, I'm not lovable, or maybe I fear being alone. Maybe you worry about a relationship or a marriage or something, and maybe you find that somebody, a partner in your life, is distant and cold, right? Or maybe there's something you really dislike. Maybe you feel you're unappreciated in the workplace. You didn't get that promotion you wanted, or maybe your career isn't on track the way you had expected it to be. Or maybe you were experienced trauma or abuse by another. Maybe you're not ready to forgive it or accept it. So let's take a few moments here. I just want you to identify one thing that you cannot accept. And it could be a big thing, or it could be a small little thing that you don't want to accept in your life. Okay, now that you have thought of what that is, let's get to a peaceful place of awareness. I have a chime here. I'm just going to ring this for us. I want to mention that if at any time you find anything in this meditation that you find that you feel too distressed, or that it's hard for you to tolerate, that you can open your eyes at any time. You are in control. So you can decide to do this meditation at any time. So you're just sitting, resting. I want you to slow your breathing a little bit and just follow the breath. Let's take a nice breath in, and let's exhale, releasing all the worries from yesterday, everything from the past, things that maybe you were holding on to. Let's just let those go for a moment. Good. Let's take another nice breath in, and let's exhale. This time releasing worries about tomorrow, all the things left undone. Just let those go. You can always come back to those later. Good. So just come into the presence of the breath, and if you can find your center, that would be nice. It might be the heart center. It could be anywhere in the body. Just see if you can locate your center and breathe into that center. Wonderful. Now I want you to picture that you are resting in a place of supreme beauty and peace, spacious peacefulness. There's nothing in this place that can harm you, and that you're totally safe and protected here. Now, this can be a real place where you are in this moment. It could be a place in nature that you love, or any place where you feel safe. If you can't think of a real place, you can even create an imaginary place in your mind's eye where you are safe, secure, and protected. Now here you are resting in this nice, safe place. So I want you to now think about people who have been helpful for you in your life. So these are people who hold a deep wish for your well-being, your health, your safety. You could think of them as benefactors, people who, when you're in their presence, you feel good, you feel safe. So imagine these people are around you, noticing how nice it is to be near them. They can be family, they can be friends, they can be neighbors. It could be either from your present or maybe from your past. But what they all have in common is they have the deep wish for your well-being. You can even include a spiritual individual or somebody who inspires you, someone you admire. It could be a Gandhi, a Martin Luther King, Jesus, a Buddha. All of these people would be here right now if they knew you needed their help. But let them be around you and send you the warm wish for your well-being and safety. And I want you to let in their blessings for you and their well wishes for you. Allow it to really seep into your being. You might feel it as a warm glow that seeps all the way down into your cells, seeps into your heart, and then radiates out to all your extremities. So breathe in the wishes for your well-being from this group of caring, loving benefactors, letting all these well wishes seep down into the whole body until you feel the warm glow of being loved and cared for. Let that wonderful feeling spread throughout your entire being. Now you might notice that thing that you cannot accept, that you thought about earlier, you could see it way far, far off in the distance. It's not threatening or anything. It's far away. It's insignificant from such a distance. But now I want you to imagine that all the blessings and the love and the wishing for your well-being that is being sent to you is like a bubble, almost like a bubble of warmth and love. You could see it as a golden bubble. And it can even think of it as your bubble of self-acceptance and wisdom and understanding. And this bubble safely can encompass anything, no matter how undifficult or wanted. Whatever's in here with you in this moment, the self-accepting bubble can grow and expand around you. And all the thoughts you have, your past, your emotions, positive or negative, once they get surrounded by the bubble, are at peace. You can just let them be. So feel the bubble expanding. Feel the sense of peacefulness expanding as the bubble grows. And you can just watch the bubble as it takes in more and more all around you. So once anything's inside the bubble of self-acceptance, you no longer have to react to it. You can just notice it with kindness, understanding, and compassion. Now the bubble's expanding further and further out. It's finally reaching out to that difficult thing that you cannot accept. So just feel what it's like as the bubble makes contact with that difficult thing. Now allow the bubble to soften in order to allow this thing inside. Imagine the bubble is accepting, completely accepting in the same way that a loving parent, a best friend, a compassionate mentor, or spiritual teacher totally accepts you for who you are. Even the flaws, even the difficulties, they're totally accepting. So let yourself come to peace and at rest with all that is inside the bubble. Even that difficult thing now is inside the bubble. And once anything's inside the bubble, there's no longer an inside or outside, really. There's no pushing or pulling, no good or bad you, no winning or losing. This is the all-inclusive, self-accepting, and loving place. So just sit with it and breathe, experiencing self-acceptance within the bubble, still noticing the loving well wishes and blessings that are being sent to you. So you might even set the intention to accept that difficult situation that is now inside the bubble more as a starting point, not an end point. And you could even, at a future time, do this visualization and see if you can even let your own wisdom guide you as to how to move forward. When you're ready to conclude this visualization, just give thanks to your your bubble of self-acceptance, knowing that you can return to this anytime and rest in its spaciousness and warmth and safety anytime you wish. So let's just sit for a few more seconds, breathing, feeling That's self-acceptance. I want to thank everybody for taking part in that. And thank you, Marie, for letting me lead that meditation.
Oh, that was so good. I'm so much
Oh,
more
great.
relaxed. I know you heard us before trying to figure out the sound and everything, and I'm going, this is so unprofessional of me. And I'm not, I'm so calm now.
That's great. Great.
So thank you so much. Well, we have just a few minutes left before you probably have your next interview. I know you're doing a lot to promote clearing emotional clutter, mindfulness practices for letting go of what's blocking your fulfillment and transformation. We've been speaking with Donald Altman. You can find him at mindfulpractices.com. And he also mentioned earlier in the hour that character strengths test, and you can find that at viacharacter.org. Donald, what would you like to, in addition to that amazing meditation, what would you like to leave listeners with today?
Well, I want to leave listeners with the hope that it really only takes a few minutes of doing these practices each day to literally change how your brain gets wired up. And so it really is an inside job, and it doesn't, it's not like you have to go to a monastery or, sit for hours doing this. But the way I designed this Clearing Emotional Clutter book, it actually will start to make changes right away for you. And so I encourage people not to think that you can't do this. You definitely can do this. And you will start to see changes much more quickly than you might imagine. And so I also want to invite everybody to go to my website and sign up for my Mindful Living newsletter on the mindfulpractices.com site. And that's a good way to get some new mindfulness information, some tips for bringing mindfulness into your life, and new contemplation. And also, I really hope people check out the Clearing Emotional Clutter book, because I wrote that book because I have seen how that clutter of the mind is so pervasive, and how we really need some more tools to help us not just clear it out, but live that fulfilling life that I think we all deserve and want.
Thank you so much for your time today, Donald. Again, it's Clearing Emotional Clutter, mindfulness practices for letting go of what's blocking your fulfillment and transformation. And you can find him at mindfulpractices.com. If you're listening to this on CITR 101.9 FM in Vancouver, Parts Unknown is up next. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to post links to the websites that were mentioned this hour, so check that out. Thank you so much for your time, Donald, and good luck. Enjoy the process of promoting your book.
Oh, thanks, Marie. Thank you so much, and bless you for the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. All right, well, I'll let you get on with your day. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye. Again, that was Donald Altman, and this has been Synchronicity Talk Radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard. I want to send you lots and lots of love. Be well. Namaste.